All right, diving right in today to something pretty huge happening over in the global trade world.
Oh, yeah. This is
The Taiwanese government's response to these brand new U.S. tariffs
big news.
as of April 4th, 2025. So we're talking right in the heat of the moment here.
Yeah,
We've got excerpts from a Taiwanese government press conference, so we're getting this straight from the source.
that's right. Yeah, you've put together a really interesting deep dive here with all this source material.
Trying to get you the info, as always.
The goal is to really figure out how Taiwan is reacting, what their plans are, how are they going to support their economy?
Right.
What does this mean for everyone else? Global trade, big picture stuff, but we don't want to get bogged down in all the political back and forth.
No politics, just the facts.
Exactly.
So this announcement from President Trump dropped on April 3rd.
Okay, so this is...
Meaning that Taiwan, they're scrambling a little bit when this press conference takes place the next day on the 4th.
Yeah, they're definitely hitting the ground running right from the get-go.
Yeah, they're in the thick of it.
The transcript even mentions officials working late into the night, trying to really assess everything as it's coming out. And the premier himself is super involved, analyzing everything, reporting to the president, adjusting strategies as they get new information.
Wow, so they're not taking this lightly at all.
No, not at all. This is a big deal for them, and they're treating it that way.
And their initial reaction, they didn't mince words.
No, they did not.
They came out and used this phrase, share.
Which translates to essentially universally unreasonable.
Universally unreasonable.
Yeah.
Yeah. And the premier even echoed that sentiment.
Yeah, he basically said, look, we've been thinking about, what might happen with these tariffs for months, but what we ended up getting is just universally unreasonable.
Yeah.
And he also pointed to 3 specific areas where they disagree with the U.S., which unfortunately this excerpt doesn't actually detail. But the message is pretty clear, right? They felt like this whole thing was fundamentally unfair.
Yeah, they're not holding back.
No, they're not.
But it wasn't all just, frustration and disappointment. They also made sure to point out all the good things, all the positives in the U.S.-Taiwan trade relationship.
Oh, absolutely. They emphasized how long this partnership has been going on, how reliable it's been, particularly when it comes to building these really resilient supply chains.
Right. And they even mentioned Taiwan's role in supporting the U.S. with its AI advancements.
Yeah, they really drove home that point about how deeply interconnected these two economies are.
Yeah.
And that these tariffs kind of miss that bigger picture.
Okay, so now this is where things get really interesting because Deputy Premier Cheng Li-cheon, who seems to be the main spokesperson here, she clarifies that these tariffs aren't actually specifically targeting Taiwan.
Right. This is a really important point to grasp. It's not about singling out Taiwan.
It's a global thing, a reciprocal policy.
Yeah. The U.S. is applying this broadly, and she actually lays out the tariff rates for other major trading partners just to put things in perspective.
So what are we talking? Give us the numbers.
All right. So China, they're getting hit with a pretty significant 54% tariff.
Wow.
Vietnam, 46%.
Okay.
Thailand, 37%. And Indonesia comes in at 32%, the same as Taiwan.
So it sounds like the U.S. is aiming to address what they see as widespread trade imbalances.
Exactly. It's not about picking on Taiwan specifically.
Right.
It's about this bigger picture of trade deficits and trying to, even things out from their perspective.
Gotcha. But even though Taiwan isn't being, singled out with a higher rate than anyone else, they're obviously still not happy about that 32%.
Oh, yeah. They're definitely not comfortable with that number. And a lot of their concern has to do with how the U.S. actually came up with that figure.
Right. It's all about the math.
Exactly.
So Deputy Premier Cheng, she explains that the USTR, or United States Trade Representative, they basically use this formula. It takes a country's trade deficit, what the U.S. divides that by the U.S. imports from that country, and then they cut it in half.
Interesting.
That's how they landed on these numbers. And, well, Taiwan is not a fan.
No, they are not happy with that methodology at all. And they actually have 3 very specific reasons why.
Yeah, let's break those down one by one.
All right. So first of all, they argue that this calculation completely ignores the fact that the U.S.-Taiwan trade relationship is actually super complementary. Meaning it's not just about competition. These economies actually support each other in all sorts of ways, especially when it comes to technology and manufacturing.
Right.
So this simple formula based on, the overall trade balance, it just doesn't capture that intricate web of interdependence.
So they're saying it's way more nuanced than just looking at, who's buying more from whom.
Exactly. It's about the specific goods being traded, the supply chains, the level of cooperation that's going on.
Right.
A simple formula just doesn't cut it.
Okay. Point number 2.
Their second point is that the parameters of this U.S. calculation, they don't consider things like, the specific dynamics of different supply chains or the fact that U.S. consumer demand isn't the same for every product from every country.
That makes sense.
Right. Like people in the U.S. might want certain things from Taiwan that they don't necessarily want from, say, Indonesia.
Right. It's not a one-size-fits-all situation.
Exactly. And Taiwan feels like this U.S. formula oversimplifies all that nuance, which could end up penalizing countries unfairly.
Okay, so their argument is that the U.S. needs to dig deeper and look at the specifics.
Right, it's not just about broad strokes.
Got it. And the third point, this is where that trade surplus comes into play, right?
Right, so this is where things get even more interesting because Taiwan actually acknowledges that their trade surplus with the U.S. has been growing since 2018.
Right.
But they say that's not because of some, nefarious scheme on their part. It's a direct result of global events.
Like what?
Well, they point to things like the U.S.-China trade war, the U.S.'s own technology restrictions on China, and this massive surge in U.S. demand for Taiwan's high-tech products like semiconductors, servers, computer components, all the stuff that's driving AI development.
Yeah.
So they're essentially saying, look, we're supplying you with the crucial components that are fueling your technological advancements.
Right.
This trade surplus is just a reflection of that demand, not some intentional imbalance we've created.
It's like they're saying, hey, we're giving you the picks and shovels for your AI gold rush, and now you're going to penalize us for it.
It's a good analogy. They see themselves as really enabling U.S. progress, and then suddenly they're getting hit with this tariff.
Okay, so they're not thrilled about that.
No, not at all.
And Deputy Premier Cheng also brings up something else, this issue of China allegedly doing this low-cost illegal transshipment.
Yeah, washing origin.
Right, washing origin. And Taiwan is very proud of their efforts to prevent that from happening, within their own borders.
Oh, yeah. They make it very clear that they have this robust three-tiered system to fight illegal transshipment. They've got prior prevention measures, then a thorough final review process, and even post-shipment investigations.
Wow. So they're really trying to cover all the bases.
Absolutely. And their argument is that they shouldn't be lumped in with countries that, have known problems with origin fraud. They're committed to fair trade, and they don't want to be associated with that kind of behavior.
Okay, so Taiwan is pushing back on the reasoning behind these tariffs pretty hard.
They definitely are.
But let's move on to the impact.
Yeah.
How is this 32% tariff actually going to affect different sectors within Taiwan?
Well, it's not looking great for a lot of industries.
Yeah.
Deputy Premier Cheng lays out a whole list, and it's pretty extensive. We're talking electronic information industry, steel metal machinery, automotive, particularly leader components, household appliances, heavy electrical machinery, wires and cables, building materials, sporting goods, general chemicals, hand tools, plumbing hardware.
Wow, that's a lot.
It is. And it's not just manufacturing that's going to be affected. Agriculture and fisheries are also worried.
Yeah, what are their concerns specifically?
Well, they're worried about losing market share in the U.S.
Yeah.
If their products become more expensive because of the tariffs.
Right.
We're talking things like butterfly orchids, edamame tea leaves, certain types of fish like non-grouper mahi-mahi sea bass.
Oh, yeah.
They're all worried about demand dropping and prices becoming less competitive.
Gotcha. So a pretty wide range of industries feeling the heat.
Definitely.
Now, there was one interesting exception here. Semiconductors and pharmaceuticals.
Oh, yeah. Those are currently exempt.
Exempt from these tariffs, but the government did say they're keeping a close eye on things.
Yeah, which makes sense. I mean, semiconductors are huge for Taiwan's economy and for the global tech supply chain, so they want to make sure that exemption stays in place.
Right. And they also briefly mentioned the potential impact on Taiwanese businesses that operate in other countries.
Right, because those countries might have different tariff rates.
Yeah, it just shows how interconnected everything is.
Absolutely. One change over here can trigger a domino effect across the entire global production network.
And the government is definitely worried about the bigger picture impact on Taiwan's overall economy.
Yeah, I mean, exports are a major driver of growth for them, so any disruptions to those export supply chains could have ripple effects on GDP, employment rates, even overall economic stability.
So they're not taking this lightly.
Not at all.
Which brings us to the support measures, right? Taiwan's plan to help their industries and workers weather this storm.
All right, so we're talking 9 major areas of focus and a massive budget of NT $880 billion.
Wow. It's a serious commitment.
It is. They're putting their money where their mouth is. They really want to mitigate the negative impact of these tariffs.
So break it down for us. What are these 9 key areas?
Okay, so 6 of them are focused on industry. And the priorities there are reducing administrative burdens, making industries more competitive, helping them expand into new markets, providing tax relief and incentives, stabilizing employment, and offering direct financial assistance.
Got it. And the other 3 areas are for agriculture.
Yep. And there's some overlap there. They're also talking about financial support, boosting competitiveness, and diversifying markets.
Okay, so a lot of similarities in their approach.
Yeah, they're trying to tackle this challenge from multiple angles.
Let's get into some specifics then. What are some of these support measures they're putting in place?
Well, financial assistance is a big one. They're going to be increasing credit loan benefits and offering interest rate subsidies.
Okay.
They're talking about reducing interest rates by 1 to 1.5%, and they're considering even higher limits for SMEs, the small and medium-sized enterprises that are going to be hit the hardest.
Makes sense. Those are the ones who are most vulnerable.
Right. And they're also looking at slashing export insurance premiums with a total insured value of NT $165 billion and premiums potentially dropping to 1/10 of what they are now.
Wow, that's huge.
Yeah. And there's also a plan for NT $200 billion in trade financing with reduced interest rates. So they're really trying to ease the financial burden on businesses.
So a lot of focus on making sure businesses can access the capital they need.
Absolutely.
Now, you mentioned reducing administrative burdens. What does that look like in practice?
Well, one interesting measure is that they're going to fully exempt packing slips for customs clearance in bonded zones.
Okay.
So this could affect over 1,200 companies in science parks, bonded factories, and warehouses, logistics centers. And they estimate that it could reduce something like 200,000 packing slips and save 100,000 work hours every month.
Wow, that's a lot of paperwork.
Yeah, they're really trying to cut down on the red tape.
And they're also expanding the use of remote customs clearance through a bonded smart service platform.
Yep, making things more efficient and less time-consuming.
Smart move. And of course, no economic response package would be complete without tax incentives.
They're highlighting existing incentives for R&D and investment in smart machinery and 5G technologies.
So what are we talking about specifically?
Well, there are tax credits of 15% or 10% for R&D expenses and 5% or 3% for investments in smart transformation.
Okay.
And there's also this provision that lets companies deduct reinvested undistributed earnings, which basically lowers their corporate income tax on those profits.
Gotcha. So they're making it more attractive for companies to invest in their future.
Exactly. And they're also proposing some new tax incentives that are really focused on those future growth areas like AI and green technology.
So what are they proposing?
They want to expand the scope of the Industry Innovation Act to include investments in AI and energy saving and carbon reduction projects.
Okay.
And these would come with higher investment limits, potentially up to NT $2 billion, and an extended deadline all the way to December 31st, 2029.
So they're thinking long term here.
Oh, yeah. And they're also proposing to make it easier for venture capital firms to invest in startups by lowering the investment threshold to NT $150 million.
Okay.
And they want to give individual angel investors more benefits, like a lower investment threshold, a shorter holding period requirement, and a higher deduction limit.
So they're really trying to stimulate innovation and entrepreneurship.
Absolutely. They want to position Taiwan as a leader in these cutting-edge industries.
Now, you also mentioned enhancing industrial competitiveness. What kind of measures are we talking about there?
Well, they're offering direct subsidies for R&D transformation projects up to NT $5 million per project or NT $40 million for industrial alliances.
Okay.
And those subsidies can cover up to 50% of the total project cost and 30% of marketing expenses.
Wow, so a pretty significant chunk of the costs.
Yeah, they're really trying to incentivize companies to innovate and stay ahead of the curve.
And they're also helping companies obtain those overseas certifications.
Which is crucial for accessing international markets.
Absolutely. And with these new tariffs in place, market diversification is more important than ever.
Oh, yeah. And they're putting their money where their mouth is. They're offering subsidies to help businesses establish a physical presence overseas, things like setting up showrooms and warehouses.
Okay.
And they're also providing assistance for companies looking to engage new agents and distributors in different regions.
Gotcha. So they're really trying to reduce reliance on the U.S. market.
Exactly.
Now, of course, anytime you have economic uncertainty, there's concern about jobs.
Right.
So what is Taiwan doing to stabilize employment?
Well, they're taking a very proactive approach. They're going to be working directly with employers and labor unions to assess the situation.
Okay.
And they're considering offering salary subsidies for workers in sectors that are particularly vulnerable to the impact of these tariffs.
So trying to keep people employed.
Exactly. And they're also promoting on-the-job training programs, offering incentives for companies to hire displaced workers, and expanding existing training and subsidy programs for young job seekers.
So multi-pronged approach.
Definitely, they're trying to cushion the blow for workers and help them adapt to this new economic reality.
And it sounds like the agricultural sector is getting a similar level of support.
Oh, absolutely. They're increasing agricultural loan interest subsidies up to 1.5% with a cap of NT $50 million.
Okay.
And they're investing heavily in strengthening the cold chain system for agricultural and fishery products, accelerating the development of higher value-added processed goods, helping farmers and fishermen obtain domestic and international certifications, boosting domestic marketing activities, and providing incentives for overseas marketing.
So a lot of investment in making Taiwan's agricultural sector more competitive.
Exactly. They're not leaving anyone behind.
So overall, a very comprehensive support package.
Very impressive.
But beyond these domestic actions, Taiwan is also looking at the bigger picture, right? They're focused on negotiations and long-term strategic planning.
Oh, yeah. They've made it very clear that they're committed to negotiating with the U.S. to try and reduce these tariffs and the number of products that are affected.
And they have some specific goals in mind.
They want to see lower tariff rates, fewer products subject to those tariffs, maximum benefits for Taiwanese businesses, and a fair and competitive playing field for Taiwan in the global market.
So how do they plan to achieve all that?
Well, they're going to be engaging directly with key U.S. players like the USTR, the Department of Commerce, the Treasury Secretary.
Okay.
They'll be reaching out to influential officials, members of Congress, American business organizations, and they're also planning to use multilateral and regional trade platforms to make their case.
So a multifaceted diplomatic approach.
Exactly.
And they've got 4 key points they want to emphasize.
Right. So first, they want to highlight how complementary the U.S. and Taiwanese economies are, especially in high tech.
Okay.
They want to emphasize Taiwan's global investments and its need for raw materials from around the world, which they believe addresses those trade imbalance concerns.
Right.
They want to underscore the importance of food security, particularly given that the U.S. has a trade surplus with Taiwan in agriculture. And they want to lay out potential countermeasures they might have to take to protect their own industries.
So they're coming to the table prepared.
Absolutely. They're not just going to roll over.
Now, beyond these immediate negotiations, it sounds like the National Development Council, the NDC, is working on longer-term strategies.
Yes, they're focused on ensuring the stability of Taiwan's economy, the continued development of its industries, and keeping those employment levels stable.
And what are some of the key strategies they're considering?
Well, they want to attract even more foreign investment into Taiwan.
Right.
They want to encourage Taiwanese companies to bring production back home, or at least do final assembly in Taiwan.
Okay.
They want to capitalize on new opportunities in those regional supply chains, particularly when it comes to AI.
Right.
They want to help businesses diversify their export markets even further.
Yeah.
And they want to boost overall competitiveness by improving cost efficiency and investing in R&D and industrial transformation.
So it's all about building a more resilient and adaptable economy.
Exactly. They're thinking ahead.
Now, finally, it sounds like the Taiwanese government is really committed to transparency and communication.
Oh, yeah. They're making a big effort to keep everyone informed about these tariffs and the support measures that are available.
So how are they doing that?
Well, they're setting up dedicated service hotlines starting on April 8th with various government ministries providing a total of 190 consultation lines.
Wow. So people can call and get information.
Exactly. And the Ministry of Economic Affairs is even offering an immediate response customer service channel for urgent inquiries.
Smart move.
Yep.
And they're also going to be publishing detailed application procedures for all 20 support measures by April 14th.
So businesses will know exactly what to do to access that support.
Great. So it's clear that Taiwan is taking this situation very seriously.
They're not messing around.
They've put together a comprehensive plan with a huge budget, and they're committed to making adjustments as needed.
They're in it for the long haul.
And they're calling for national unity, urging everyone to support the government's policies as they navigate this global economic shift.
They're presenting a united front.
Okay, expert speaker. I'm going to leave our listeners with this final thought.
Right.
Given how interconnected these global supply chains are, how do you think these U.S. tariffs and Taiwan's response are going to shape international trade dynamics in the coming years?
That's the million-dollar question, right? Because this isn't happening in a vacuum. This is just one piece of a much larger puzzle.
Right.
The way Taiwan handles this, the success of their support measures the outcome of their negotiations with the U.S., it's all going to have ripple effects throughout the world.
For sure.
I mean, think about how supply chains might adapt and shift. Think about where new trade alliances might form. Think about which industries might see unexpected opportunities or challenges as a result of all this.
Yeah.
This is just the beginning of a much bigger story.
We're all connected, and this is just the first chapter.
It's going to be fascinating to see how it all unfolds.
Thanks for breaking it all down for us, expert speaker.
Anytime. Always happy to dive deep.
Until next time, stay curious.
And keep exploring.